Thank you for clicking in this video. Are you ready to confront the unknown? Stick around to unravel the mysteries and face the fear that hides in plain sight.
It was supposed to be another routine exploration, a night of urban adventuring beneath the bustling streets of New York City. The group of four, Logan, Carter, Rachel, and James, were seasoned urban explorers, thrill-seekers who prided themselves on delving into forgotten places, abandoned subway stations, derelict warehouses, and crumbling underground bunkers. But tonight, they found something different, something that wasn't on any of their maps. Logan, the leader of the group, was the first to notice the entrance. They had been navigating through an old subway tunnel that had long since been closed to the public, dusty and filled with echoes of a forgotten age. At first glance, it appeared to be another dead end, a patch of wall where the tracks simply stopped, but then Rachel spotted the faint outline of a door. It was concealed behind rusted metal bars and overgrown with moss, its surface marked by deep gouges as though something, or someone, had tried to claw their way inside. "What do you think it is?" Rachel asked, brushing away the grime to reveal a faded sign. The words, though nearly illegible, still sent a chill through the group. No entry. Carter laughed nervously. Typical New York, always hiding something. James, the quiet one, knelt down to inspect the lock, a rusted chain dangling loosely from the handles. "Looks like someone's been here before. But it's been a while." Logan, always eager for a challenge, didn't hesitate. "Let's see where it goes." He pulled the door open with a screech of metal, and the group stepped into the unknown. The air inside the tunnel was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Their flashlights flickered, casting narrow beams of light along the cracked walls, illuminating graffiti from decades ago. There was a palpable tension as they moved deeper, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. This tunnel felt different, older, untouched for longer than they could have imagined. As they ventured further, the passage widened into a series of chambers, each one more disturbing than the last. The first chamber held nothing but dust and debris, but the second was filled with a collection of old suitcases. Some were tattered, others appeared almost new, as if they had been left there only recently. Logan approached one of the cases, his curiosity piqued. He unzipped it slowly, the noise echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Inside were clothes, folded neatly, but covered in a fine layer of dust. "These belong to someone," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "But where are they now?" James found a photograph among the belongings, its edges yellowed with age. It showed a young man and woman, smiling happily in front of a building that none of them recognized. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered, his brow furrowed. "How long has this been here?" Logan's flashlight caught something on the far side of the chamber, an inscription carved into the stone wall. He stepped closer to read it, his heart pounding in his chest. "No one leaves once they've entered." "What the hell is this place?" Carter asked, backing away from the suitcases. "We need to get out of here." But Logan, ever the skeptic, shrugged off the growing sense of dread. "We've come this far. We can't just turn back now." The group pressed on, the darkness seeming to close in around them. The third chamber was worse. Objects were strewn about haphazardly, watches, wallets, purses. All items that once belonged to people, yet there was no sign of anyone here. Rachel shivered as she picked up an old journal, its pages filled with frantic scribbles, the words barely legible. "They're watching. Always watching." Logan, now visibly unnerved, turned to the others. "Maybe we should." Before he could finish, there was a sound. faint at first, but growing louder. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing from the tunnel behind them. "We're not alone," James whispered, his eyes wide with fear. They turned to face the direction they had come from, but the tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly now, the entrance they had passed through long gone, swallowed by the darkness. Panic surged through them as the footsteps grew closer, though there was no sign of who or what was making them. "We need to move," Logan urged, his voice tight. "Now." But as they sprinted down the tunnel, deeper into the maze of chambers, the oppressive feeling of being watched only intensified. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing colder with each step. And then, as they reached yet another chamber, they saw it, an old, rusted sign hanging above a narrow door, "City property, unauthorized access prohibited." "What the hell is this place?" Rachel gasped, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Logan hesitated, but there was no turning back now. He pushed open the door, revealing a staircase descending further into the earth. "We have to find a way out," he muttered, leading the way. As they descended into the unknown, the sense of foreboding only grew stronger. Whatever secrets this tunnel held, they were about to discover that some things were better left buried. The stairs seemed to stretch on forever, spiraling deeper into the earth, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. The further they descended, the more the oppressive darkness clung to them, as if the very air was resisting their presence. Logan kept glancing back, his flashlight casting fleeting shadows against the cold stone walls, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves standing before a massive iron door, its surface rusted and worn, yet still imposing. A faded emblem was engraved in the center, though none of them recognized it. Carter stepped forward, running his fingers over the cold metal. "This door, it's not just old. It's ancient." James's voice trembled as he spoke. "Do we really want to open that? I mean, we've already seen enough to know something's not right here." Logan, still driven by an unsettling mixture of curiosity and stubbornness, approached the door and grabbed the handle. It groaned as he pulled, the hinges screaming in protest before the door finally gave way. Beyond it lay a room unlike any they had encountered so far, a cavernous space with walls lined with filing cabinets, shelves stacked with dusty boxes, and rows of ancient desks scattered throughout. Rachel was the first to speak, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "This looks like a records room." Logan moved cautiously into the room, his flashlight sweeping over the papers and folders scattered across the desks. The air was heavy with dust, and the musty smell of decay was overpowering. As he approached one of the desks, he noticed a thick file lying open. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the name scrawled on the front sent a chill down his spine: John Matheson, deceased. Rachel stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. "Who is John Matheson? And why is his file down here?" Logan began flipping through the pages, his heart racing as he skimmed the contents. The file detailed a man's life in meticulous detail, his address, his occupation, even his favorite places in the city. But the final entry was the most disturbing: subject terminated, classified as a threat to city interests. Carter, now visibly shaken, was rifling through one of the nearby cabinets. "There are hundreds of these files," he muttered. "People who've disappeared over the years. All of them marked as threats. What the hell is this place?" James, still standing by the entrance, glanced nervously back at the stairs. "We need to go. This isn't just some abandoned tunnel. This is something bigger." But Logan wasn't listening. He was already digging through another file, this one detailing the disappearance of a woman named Margaret Holloway. As he read the final line, his blood ran cold. Subject eliminated, evidence secured in Chamber 7. That's what this is, Logan said, his voice shaking with realization. This place, it's where they hide things. People. Evidence. Rachel stared at him, her face pale. You're saying the city is involved? That they've been getting rid of people? People who knew too much, Logan replied, his throat dry. People who threatened powerful interests. And now we've found their secrets. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The realization that they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than they could have imagined was sinking in fast. Carter began pacing, his hands shaking. We need to leave. Now. If they know we're down here. But before he could finish, the lights flickered. For a brief moment, everything was plunged into total darkness, and in that instant, they heard it, a low, rumbling sound coming from the tunnel they had just descended. Logan's flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating the terrified faces of his friends. What was that? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James backed away from the entrance. We're not alone. Someone, or something, is down here with us. The group huddled together, their hearts pounding as the rumbling grew louder. It was as if something massive was moving through the tunnels, getting closer with each passing second. Logan's mind raced. Could it be the government? Had they triggered some kind of alarm by entering the restricted area? We need to hide, Logan said, his voice urgent. If we stay out in the open, they'll find us. But there was nowhere to hide. The room was filled with filing cabinets and old desks, but no exits, no safe corners. Desperation gripped them as the rumbling reached a deafening pitch. And then, without warning, the sound stopped. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. For a long moment, no one dared move. The group stood frozen, waiting for the next sign of danger. Then, from the far end of the room, a slow, deliberate creaking sound echoed. The door they had entered through, had it moved? Logan's flashlight flickered towards the source of the noise. The door was ajar, and in the dim light, they saw it, something large and shadowy, moving just beyond the threshold. It wasn't human. The shape was all wrong, too tall, too angular, and it moved with a slow, deliberate grace that sent a jolt of primal fear through them. We need to run, James whispered, his voice trembling. But as they turned to flee, the door slammed shut with a force that reverberated through the entire chamber. Whatever was out there didn't want them to leave. The slam of the iron door echoed through the chamber like a death knell, sealing them in. Logan, Rachel, Carter, and James stood frozen in terror, staring at the massive door that now separated them from whatever lurked in the tunnels beyond. Logan, what the hell do we do? Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Logan's mind raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. The shadowy figure outside hadn't been human, he was sure of it. Whatever was down here with them was something they didn't understand, something far more dangerous than they'd imagined. He grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her behind one of the filing cabinets. We need to stay quiet, he muttered, glancing at Carter and James. Hide. Now. Without a word, the group scattered, ducking behind the dusty desks and cabinets, trying to suppress the rising panic that threatened to consume them. Logan's heart hammered in his chest as he crouched behind a rusty desk, clutching his flashlight tightly. He peered out from his hiding spot, trying to see if the creature, or whatever it was, had followed them into the room. The silence was unbearable. Every breath felt like it could betray their position. The distant sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels, but aside from that, there was nothing. Logan strained to listen, but all he could hear was the ragged breathing of his friends and the rapid thumping of his own heart. Then, the creaking started again. From the far end of the room, the sound of metal bending, as if something heavy was pressing against the door. Logan's throat tightened as the door began to groan under the strain, bulging inward as if something immense was trying to force its way through. Suddenly, the door buckled. With a deafening crash, it exploded inward, sending shards of rusted metal flying across the room. Logan ducked instinctively, feeling a sharp sting as a fragment grazed his cheek. He gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to cry out as the hulking figure entered the room, its grotesque silhouette framed by the dim light of the tunnel beyond. It was taller than any man, its limbs elongated and twisted in unnatural angles. Its face, or what passed for a face, was obscured by shadows, but its movements were unnervingly smooth, like a predator stalking its prey. Logan's blood ran cold as the thing sniffed the air, as though it could smell their fear. Carter, hiding behind a cabinet, shifted ever so slightly, his foot scraping against the floor. The creature's head snapped in his direction, its body contorting with a horrifying speed. Before anyone could react, it lunged towards him. "Carter, no!" Logan shouted, but it was too late. In a blur of motion, the creature was upon him. Carter screamed as the thing grabbed him, its elongated fingers wrapping around his throat like a vice. His eyes bulged with terror, his hands clawing desperately at the creature's grip, but it was no use. With a sickening crunch, the creature twisted Carter's neck, and his body went limp. Rachel stifled a sob as she watched from behind a desk, her hand clamped over her mouth. Logan's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared in disbelief at Carter's lifeless body, now crumpled on the floor. He had known something was wrong the moment they had found the tunnel, but now the reality was crashing down on him. This wasn't just a mystery or a government conspiracy, it was a nightmare, and they were trapped in it. James, hiding just a few feet away, locked eyes with Logan. His expression was one of pure terror, but also understanding. They had to act, now. Logan gestured silently towards the far side of the room, where a narrow passageway seemed to lead deeper into the underground labyrinth. It wasn't a way out, but it was their only option. He motioned for Rachel and James to follow his lead, his body tense with the fear of making a sound. The creature stood over Carter's body for a moment longer, as if savoring its kill, then slowly turned its head towards the rest of the room, searching. Logan's skin prickled with dread as it moved closer to where they were hiding. Rachel shot him a panicked look, but Logan shook his head, silently urging her to stay still. Any sudden movement could draw the thing's attention. Inch by inch, they began to move, staying low and close to the ground, hoping the darkness would cloak their escape. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric felt like it could betray them. As they neared the entrance to the passage, Logan glanced back. The creature had paused, its head tilted in an almost curious manner, as if it sensed something. A bead of sweat trickled down Logan's face as he forced himself to stay calm. One wrong move, and they'd end up like Carter. Just as they reached the passage, Rachel's foot caught on a loose piece of debris. She stumbled, her body hitting the floor with a dull thud. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The creature's head snapped in their direction, and with a horrifying screech, it charged. "Run!" Logan shouted, yanking Rachel to her feet as they bolted into the narrow passage. The walls closed in around them, the air thick and suffocating as they sprinted deeper into the maze of tunnels. Behind them, the creature's footsteps pounded against the floor, growing louder and closer with every passing second. James stumbled but caught himself, his breath coming in ragged gasps as they raced through the passage. "We're not going to make it," he yelled, his voice edged with panic. Logan's mind raced, searching for any possible escape. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the underground maze. The creature's guttural growls echoed behind them, and Logan could feel its presence closing in. Suddenly, they burst into a larger chamber, a cavernous room with high ceilings and walls lined with strange, rusted machinery. At the center of the room stood a massive steel door, reinforced with bolts and padlocks. Logan didn't know where it led, but it was their only hope. "Get to the door," he shouted, pushing Rachel and James ahead of him. As they reached the door, Logan frantically searched for a way to open it. His hands fumbled with the locks, his fingers trembling as the creature's footsteps grew deafeningly loud. The thing was almost upon them. "Hurry!" Rachel screamed, her voice cracking with terror. With a final twist, the last padlock came free, and Logan heaved the door open. They scrambled inside, slamming it shut just as the creature reached the entrance. The sound of its claws raking against the metal reverberated through the chamber, sending chills down their spines. For a brief moment, they were safe. But Logan knew the nightmare was far from over. Inside the steel chamber, the air felt heavier, staler. Logan, Rachel, and James collapsed against the cold metal walls, gasping for breath. The screeching and pounding from the creature outside continued, relentless, its claws scraping against the door like nails on a chalkboard. Each sound sent jolts of dread through their bodies, but at least for the moment, they had bought themselves some time. Logan wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand trembling. Carter was gone. They had lost one of their own to something they barely understood. His mind flashed back to Carter's body, limp and broken on the floor, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He pushed it aside. This wasn't the time to lose control. "We can't stay here," James muttered between labored breaths. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Logan nodded. "No, we can't. That thing, it won't stop until it gets to us. We need to keep moving." Rachel looked around the room, her expression wary. "But where do we go? This isn't just some abandoned tunnel. There's something bigger going on down here. And whatever that thing is, it's not the only danger." Logan's gaze followed Rachel's, sweeping over the room. Unlike the previous chambers, this one felt different, less forgotten, more industrial. The walls were lined with rusted pipes, some of which seemed to hum faintly, as if still connected to an active system. In the center of the room, large, steel crates were stacked haphazardly, some with strange, official-looking symbols and faded government stamps. A sense of unease settled in the pit of Logan's stomach. The crates. The machinery. This place wasn't abandoned, it had been used for something sinister. "We've stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to see," Logan said, his voice low. "This isn't just some forgotten tunnel. This is a cover-up." James's eyes flicked to Logan. "A cover-up? For what?" Logan's gaze drifted to the crates, his mind piecing together fragments of the nightmare they had stumbled into. "Think about it. We found personal items, wallets, watches, photographs, belonging to people who disappeared. They were all hidden in those rooms. And now, look at this place. It's like a storage facility, a hidden one. This isn't just an accident. They're hiding something down here." Rachel frowned. "You think this is some kind of government operation? What, they're getting rid of people?" "Or worse," Logan said, his voice grim. "They're eliminating anyone who knows too much. People who became a threat." Rachel's breath hitched. "Logan, this is insane." But deep down, Logan knew it wasn't. The evidence was all around them, and the creature that stalked them was proof of something darker lurking beneath the surface of the city. "We have to keep moving," he said, forcing himself to focus. "We'll figure out what's really going on when we get out of here. But first, we need to find an exit." James stood up, looking around the room. "If there is one. For all we know, we're trapped down here." Logan pushed the thought aside. "There has to be a way out. There always is." The pounding on the steel door had stopped, replaced by a low, menacing growl. The creature hadn't given up. It was waiting, watching, perhaps searching for another way in. Logan motioned for the others to follow him. They moved cautiously toward the far end of the room, where another door, smaller but still solid, was built into the wall. This one wasn't as heavily reinforced as the one they'd entered through, and Logan hoped it led somewhere deeper into the tunnels, or maybe even to a maintenance exit. As he reached for the door's handle, something in the room shifted, a faint click, like a switch being triggered. Logan froze, his hand inches from the door. "What was that?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Logan could respond, the floor beneath them trembled. A low rumble filled the air, and suddenly, the ground dropped beneath their feet. Logan shouted as Rachel, and James were plunged into darkness, tumbling through a hidden trapdoor. They hit the ground hard, the impact jarring. Logan groaned, pain shooting up his side as he scrambled to his feet. The air here was colder, the darkness more complete. His flashlight had been knocked from his hand during the fall, but after a few frantic seconds of searching, he found it and flicked it on. The beam of light revealed a narrow passageway carved from stone, unlike the metallic and industrial surroundings above. The walls were wet and slick, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Rachel and James were both on their feet, bruised but otherwise unharmed. "What the hell just happened?" James panted, his voice trembling. "Where are we?" Logan scanned their surroundings, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "We're deeper. This place, it's older than the tunnels above. And I don't think anyone was supposed to find it." Rachel pointed to something in the corner of the room, her voice shaking. "Logan, look." He turned his flashlight towards where she was pointing. In the corner of the room, half buried under rubble, was a pile of bones, human remains. Tattered clothing still clung to the skeletal figures, and scattered among the bones were more personal items, watches, wallets, rings. Just like the ones they had seen in the previous chambers. A chill ran down Logan's spine. They weren't the first to stumble upon this place. And judging by the remains, they wouldn't be the last. James's voice was barely a whisper. "We have to get out of here, Logan. We can't end up like them." Logan's mind raced. The creature, the tunnels, the hidden chambers, they all pointed to something deliberate, something controlled. This wasn't an accident. This was a machine, a system designed to disappear people, to erase them from existence. And now, they were caught in its web. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. There has to be a way out. We keep moving. We stay together, and we keep moving. Rachel nodded, though her face was pale. James said nothing, but the terror in his eyes spoke volumes. They were in too deep now, and there was no turning back. With the creature still somewhere above them and the horrifying realization that they were standing on the remains of past victims, Logan knew their only hope was to descend further into the unknown. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became, but it was their only shot at survival. They stepped forward into the darkness, leaving the bones behind, unaware of the horrors that still awaited them below. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the oppressive silence grew heavier, broken only by the faint drip of water and the echo of their footsteps. The stone passage seemed to stretch endlessly, and the walls grew narrower, forcing Logan, Rachel, and James to move in single file. Every step felt like a march toward doom, yet they had no choice. Going back meant certain death. Logan held the flashlight in a tight grip, sweeping it from side to side as the beam cut through the suffocating darkness. Every shadow seemed to shift, every corner a potential hiding place for the creature that stalked them. He could still hear the distant echoes of its growls, following them like a specter of death, always one step behind. "We need to find a way up," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "There has to be an access tunnel or something. We can't keep going down." James didn't respond, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes darted nervously to every noise. Logan knew they were reaching a breaking point, both mentally and physically. Just as Logan was about to reply, his foot hit something solid. He stopped abruptly, his light shining down to reveal a rusted metal grate embedded in the floor. Kneeling down, he ran his fingers over its surface. It looked ancient, older than the rest of the tunnel. Through the gaps, he could see another level below, though it was impossible to tell how far the drop was. "There's something down here," Logan said, his voice low. "Another level." Rachel knelt beside him, peering through the grate. "What is this place?" "It's like a labyrinth. Built to keep people out, or to trap them in." Before Logan could respond, there was a sudden rumble beneath them. The ground trembled, and the tunnel walls groaned as if they were alive, shifting and twisting. The grate beneath them shook violently, and without warning, the metal gave way. They fell. Logan hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. His flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam flickering before it went dark. In the chaos, he heard Rachel cry out, followed by James's panicked breathing. It took a few agonizing seconds before Logan managed to collect himself, gasping for air as he fumbled for the flashlight. When the beam finally came back to life, the scene before him made his blood run cold. They had fallen into what looked like an underground storage facility, but it wasn't like the chambers above. This one was vast, stretching out in all directions like a massive crypt. The walls were lined with rows of steel shelves, each filled with boxes and crates, some rusted and ancient, others newer, labeled with names and dates that sent a shiver down Logan's spine. But it wasn't the shelves or the crates that held his attention. Scattered across the floor were bodies, some skeletal, others more recent, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The bodies were arranged in neat rows, as if they had been catalogued, filed away like the forgotten objects on the shelves. Rachel gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God!" Logan felt his stomach churn. "This is a graveyard. They've been killing people and storing them here." James stumbled back, his face pale as death. "We need to get out of here. Now." But as Logan stepped forward, his flashlight caught something else, something that made his heart nearly stop. In the far corner of the room, something moved. At first, Logan thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, a shadow shifting in the dim light. But then he saw it again, a figure hunched and crawling between the shelves, its movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't the creature they had encountered before, this was something different, something human. Rachel saw it too, her voice barely a whisper. "Logan, what is that?" Logan's heart pounded in his chest as the figure slowly stood, its silhouette becoming clearer in the dim light. It was a man, tall, gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were sunken, dark hollows staring out from a face that looked like it had forgotten what life was. He wore tattered clothes, and in his hands, he clutched a notebook, old, worn, and filled with pages that fluttered as he moved. The man stepped forward, his voice a hoarse rasp. "You shouldn't have come here." Logan's mind raced, every instinct telling him to run, but something about the man held him in place. "Who are you?" Logan asked, his voice trembling. The man's lips curled into a sickly smile, revealing teeth that were yellowed and cracked. "I was, like you, an explorer, a seeker of secrets. But I found something I wasn't meant to find." Rachel stepped closer to Logan, her eyes wide with fear. "What happened to you?" The man's smile faded, his gaze growing distant. I became part of the system. The machine. This place, it doesn't just kill people. It erases them. Every trace of their existence, gone. They become part of the tunnels, part of the secret. And soon, so will you. Logan felt a chill run down his spine. We're getting out of here. We're not staying. The man shook his head slowly. There's no way out. Not once you've seen what you've seen. They'll come for you, just like they came for me. The government, the people in power, they control this place. It's a graveyard for those who knew too much. And now, you know too much. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the chamber, and the ground shook once more. The man's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes wide with terror. They're coming. Without another word, he turned and fled into the darkness, disappearing between the rows of shelves like a ghost. Logan's heart raced as he turned to Rachel and James. We have to move. Now. They sprinted toward the far end of the chamber, weaving between the bodies and crates, the oppressive weight of the place closing in around them. Logan's mind raced with questions. Who was that man? How long had he been trapped down here? And more importantly, how were they going to escape? But as they reached the far wall, their path was blocked by a massive steel door, reinforced, impenetrable. Logan's heart sank. They were trapped. Behind them, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, heavy, deliberate, getting closer. It wasn't the creature from before. It was something worse. Rachel grabbed Logan's arm, her voice shaking. What do we do? Logan's mind raced. They were out of time, out of options. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. There has to be a way out. There's always a way out. But as the footsteps grew louder, Logan realized that their fight for survival had only just begun. They weren't just running from a creature. They were running from the truth. And the truth always caught up. The footsteps grew louder, a slow and steady rhythm that echoed off the stone walls, like the ticking of a death clock. Logan's pulse raced as he frantically scanned the room for any sign of an escape. The massive steel door in front of them was an insurmountable obstacle, and there was no way they could break through it. The cold reality of their situation sank in. This was not just a maze, it was a tomb. Rachel tugged on his arm, her voice strained with desperation. Logan, we have to hide. We don't have time. Logan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Over here. He pointed to a narrow gap between two rows of shelves, where the shadows seemed thicker. They hurried into the small space, crouching low and holding their breath as the footsteps came closer. James was trembling uncontrollably, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. Logan knew he was barely holding it together, and that any sudden movement might send him spiraling into panic. The tension was unbearable, each second stretched into what felt like hours as they waited, trapped in the darkness. And then they saw it. Emerging from the far side of the room was a group of men, silent, dressed in dark suits, their faces obscured by masks. They moved with precision, their steps perfectly synchronized, and they carried heavy bags slung over their shoulders. One of the men, taller than the rest, stopped and looked directly in their direction. Logan's heart nearly stopped. Had they been spotted? The man's gaze lingered for a moment, but he didn't move toward them. Instead, he turned to his companions and gestured toward the bodies strewn across the floor. Collect the evidence. Dispose of it. Logan watched in horror as the men began methodically picking up the bodies, as though they were cleaning up after a gruesome crime scene. They handled the remains with cold efficiency, dumping them into the bags without a second thought. The quiet professionalism of it all was terrifying, as if this was routine for them, just another day at work. Rachel leaned closer to Logan, her breath shaky. Who are they? What are they doing? Logan shook his head, barely able to comprehend what he was seeing. They're erasing everything. The bodies, the evidence, they're covering it all up. James finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "We're next, aren't we?" Logan didn't want to admit it, but the truth was undeniable. These men weren't just here to clean up, they were part of the same machine that had swallowed the tunnels, the same machine that erased lives. They were part of the government's operation to silence anyone who stumbled upon the secrets buried beneath New York. Logan's mind raced, searching for a plan, a way out. But the more he thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. They were trapped in a labyrinth of death, with no clear path to freedom. And now, these men were closing in on them. Suddenly, the sound of a loud crash echoed through the chamber, followed by a guttural snarl. The creature they had encountered earlier was back, its presence announced by the sickening sound of claws scraping against the stone floor. The men in suits froze, their heads snapping toward the sound, their calm composure shattered in an instant. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted, his voice laced with fear. Logan seized the opportunity. While the men were distracted, he motioned to Rachel and James. "Now, we have to move." They crept out from their hiding spot and darted toward the far end of the room, keeping low as the chaos unfolded behind them. The creature barreled into the room, a monstrous shadow that tore through the shelves, scattering crates and bodies alike. The men scrambled, trying to fight back, but the creature was relentless, tearing through them with terrifying speed and ferocity. Logan's heart pounded in his chest as they reached a small access door at the edge of the chamber. It was rusted and barely hanging on its hinges, but it was their only shot. He yanked it open, revealing a narrow staircase that led even deeper into the earth. "Go!" Logan urged, pushing Rachel and James through the door. He followed close behind, pulling the door shut just as the creature let out a deafening roar, its claws tearing through the remnants of the steel shelves. They descended the staircase in a mad rush, the air growing colder and more oppressive with every step. Logan's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. The government's involvement, the creature, the bodies, nothing made sense. It was like they had stepped into a nightmare, one they couldn't wake up from. When they finally reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in another tunnel, this one even older and more decrepit than the one above. The walls were crumbling, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Logan's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rachel collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. "This can't be real. It's like we're trapped in some kind of horror movie." Logan knelt beside her, his own breath ragged. "I don't know what's going on, but we need to keep moving. There has to be a way out." James slumped against the opposite wall, shaking his head. "We're never getting out of here. They're going to find us. They always find you." Logan wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He glanced down the tunnel, the beam of his flashlight illuminating a rusted sign that hung crookedly on the wall. It was barely legible, but the words sent a chill down his spine. "Quarantine zone, do not enter." He swallowed hard, realizing that wherever they were headed, it was far worse than what they had just left behind. But they had no choice. With a deep breath, Logan stood and began walking, his footsteps echoing in the darkness as they ventured deeper into the abyss, toward a fate more terrifying than they could ever imagine. The tunnel seemed endless, a winding labyrinth of decay and dread that wrapped itself around their minds. Logan led the way, his flashlight barely piercing the oppressive darkness ahead. Rachel and James followed in silence, their breaths shallow and their footsteps heavy. They were too deep now, too far gone, and the overwhelming feeling of inevitability hung over them like a storm cloud. Logan's mind churned, trying to piece together everything they had witnessed. The men in suits, the creature, the forgotten bodies, all of it pointed to something much darker than he had initially imagined. This wasn't just a hidden tunnel. It was a graveyard for secrets, a place where those who knew too much were erased from the world above. The walls around them were covered in rusted pipes and faded symbols, cryptic markings that suggested the tunnel had been repurposed long ago. This place had a history, one that no one was supposed to discover. As they moved deeper, the air became colder, the silence heavier. It felt as though they were walking into the belly of some ancient beast, waiting to be swallowed whole. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, dimly lit by flickering industrial lights hanging from the ceiling. The room was massive, stretching out like a forgotten cathedral, with rows of metal containers stacked against the walls. Each container was labeled with a number and a name, all faded and worn, as though they had been stored there for decades. Rachel gasped as she walked past one of the containers, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Logan, look at these names." Logan stepped closer, squinting at the labels. His stomach twisted. Each name was familiar, missing persons cases that had gripped New York over the years. Journalists, activists, political figures, all of them had vanished without a trace. And now, here they were, stored like cargo, buried in the depths of the city. James backed away from the containers, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. We need to leave. Now." Logan clenched his fists. "There's no way out. Don't you get it? This place, this whole system, it's designed to disappear people." Rachel's voice wavered. "Disappear people? You mean, they're killing them?" Logan shook his head slowly. "Not just killing. They're erasing them. They don't just die, Rachel. They get wiped from existence. Everything about them, their belongings, their records, their stories, vanishes. It's like they never existed." The realization hit them all at once, the full weight of it sinking into their bones. This wasn't just a government cover-up. It was a massive, well-oiled machine that systematically removed people who got too close to the truth. And now, they were caught in its gears. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. The men in suits were back, their silhouettes emerging from the far end of the room. Logan's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Rachel and James, pulling them behind one of the large containers. "They found us," James whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "We're dead. We're all dead." Logan's mind raced. There was no time to think, no time to plan. The men were getting closer, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. They had no weapons, no means of defense. Running would only lead them deeper into the maze, and fighting was out of the question. They were cornered. As the men approached, Logan felt a cold dread seep into his veins. These weren't ordinary enforcers. They were the cleanup crew, the ones who made sure no one ever found out about this place. They were the final piece of the puzzle, the ones who silenced anyone who got too close. Rachel grabbed Logan's arm, her grip tight. "What do we do? We can't let them take us." Logan stared at her, the hopelessness of their situation written all over his face. "There's nothing we can do. We've seen too much." The men stopped just a few feet away from their hiding spot, their voices low but unmistakably commanding. "Search the area. Make sure no one gets out." Logan felt his pulse quicken. They were trapped. This was the end. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air, sharp and mechanical. A door, hidden within the shadows, slowly creaked open at the far end of the chamber. Logan's eyes darted toward it. It was their only chance. Without a word, he grabbed Rachel and James, pulling them toward the door. The men hadn't noticed yet, too focused on their search of the containers. Logan's heart raced as they reached the threshold, the door barely opened wide enough to slip through. They stepped into another tunnel, this one narrow and suffocating, the walls closing in around them like a vice. Logan pushed forward, his body running on adrenaline. They didn't have much time. The men would soon realize they were gone, and when they did, the hunt would begin. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the unknown. Logan's mind was clouded with fear and exhaustion, his muscles burning with every step. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when freedom was so close. Finally, they emerged into another chamber, smaller this time, with a single elevator at the center. Logan's heart soared with hope. This was it, the way out. He rushed to the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly. Nothing happened. Rachel's voice cracked. "Logan, what if it doesn't work?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was too painful to admit. The sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. The men were coming. Logan slammed his fist against the elevator panel, his frustration boiling over. "Come on. Work, damn it." And then, with a jolt, the elevator doors creaked open. They piled inside, Logan hitting the button for the surface level. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to ascend, the soft hum of machinery the only sound in the suffocating silence. Rachel collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. James stared at the floor, his body trembling uncontrollably. Logan leaned against the metal railing, his breath ragged, his mind racing. They were safe. For now. But deep down, Logan knew the truth. They could escape the tunnels, but they couldn't escape the machine. The system that had built this place, that had erased those people, it was still out there, watching, waiting. And it wouldn't stop until they were silenced, too. The elevator shuddered to a halt, and the doors slowly opened. The cold night air rushed in, and for the first time in hours, they breathed freely. But Logan knew it was temporary. There would be no going back to their normal lives. They had seen too much, learned too many secrets. As they stepped out into the city streets, the enormity of their situation settled over them like a crushing weight. They were free, but not for long. And somewhere in the shadows of New York, the machine was already turning, its gears grinding toward their inevitable end. No one escapes the tunnel. No one.
If you want to watch another story, there is another video appearing on your screen now. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling stories.